Welcome students to the next lesson in attitude change. Today we will be talking about self-perception and psychological reactance theories. So as I said, we will primarily be focusing upon self-perception and psychological reactance. So in continuation of our discussions, people can be persuaded to change their attitudes as well as their behavior can be changed either because they think systematically about a compelling message or because they are influenced by more peripheral cues as well. But we also notice that some people sometimes are tough to yield to the efforts to change their attitudes. It is not easy to bring about a change in their attitudes. Factors may be many and beyond the scope of few theoretical perspectives which we have already discussed. So then it is more appropriate to say that several factors together enhance our ability to resist even highly skilled efforts at persuasion. So in this lesson that we are going to talk about today, that we are going to discuss today, we will look into two theories which explain attitude change and resistance to change from two different theoretical perspectives. We will discuss the theories of self-perception first and then reactance that we are going to discuss today. We will start with self-perception. In our everyday life, every person, all people observe other people's actions and behaviors and we tend to make inferences from whatever we observe about their attitudes based upon whatever we observe. When people see how another person acts in a particular situation, they often attribute the behavior to the person's traits and attitudes. Interestingly, sometimes people also observe their own behavior and make similar inferences about their own attitudes based on their behavior. So according to this self-perception theory, when people are unsure of their own attitudes, one way to infer them is by looking at their behaviors. Darrell Bem proposed self-perception theory in 1967, wherein he argued that people sometimes analyze their own behavior in the same fashion as they would analyze somebody else's behavior. For a long time, cognitive dissonance theory remained as a theoretical interpretation for research on attitude change and behavior. Bem in 1967 argued that often we do not really know what our attitudes are and we infer them both from our behavior as well as the contexts in which the behavior occurs. When you choose certain fruit, for example, you are put before you a bowl of fruits, assorted fruits, several fruits, and then in front of you the bowl is kept and you have to pick up from them and eat. When someone is asked the feeling about picking up one particular fruit and eat, the thoughts may be in the lines such as, I have chosen this fruit and not because anyone else has forced me to choose, I have chosen it. Hence, I must really like it. Because I have chosen it, I really like it. And why did I choose it? Because of my wish to eat it. So this will be followed by a response that you like that fruit. Once that thought occurs, you will say that you like that fruit. So Bem proposed something that was very much opposite to how people's attitudes and behavioral patterns were thought of till then. Most people would agree, for example, that a person who perceives himself or herself as interested in long trips of trekking, he may do it because he is interested in it. It may be a result of his interest in trekking. So what he does, he buys necessary equipment and go on long trekking trips. That is, the person's attitudes and self-perception influence his or her behavior. Bem, however, reversed this relation by suggesting that it is also possible that people understand their attitudes and interests because they have made inferences based on their behavior. Thus, this person who we said is interested in trekking could infer that he or she is interested in trekking on the basis of frequent trekking trips that he or she has with friends, and spending lot of money on gadgets and equipment which are required for trekking. This can be applied to the attitude discrepant behavior in the experiment, where $1 is offered to the participant. Remember the experiment that we have talked about. To tell a stranger that the task was very enjoyable, he was given $1. When the participant reports that the task was enjoyable, he tells himself that if the task was not really enjoyable, I would not have lied when paid only $1. That means for me, the task must have been really enjoyable. Otherwise, why would I lie? If he had been given $20 on the other hand, he would have said to himself that the reason that I told that it was enjoyable was because I got $20 to tell the lie and not because I really enjoyed it. Thus, both self-perception theory and dissonance theory believe that the more people are paid to say something, the less they believe it. But both theories propose the same for different reasons. You understand, students, understand this difference between dissonance theory and the present self-perception theory. The traditional view of dissonance theory says that attitudes are strong and enduring predispositions when people have to engage themselves in behavior which is counter to their attitude. There is an unpleasant state of tension, and this will be relieved by changing these strong attitudes. On the other hand, Bem's self-perception theory states that our expression of attitudes is through casual verbal statements. These statements are made after we observe our own behavior and the conditions under which our behavior has occurred. Many psychologists agree with both these versions. We cannot say, nobody strongly says that only one particular theory is important. They support both the versions. Now, let us look at self-perception theory and its relation to emotion. A similar explanation has been given for emotions as well by the theory, by suggesting that people infer their emotions by observing their bodies and their behaviors. That means, in other words, people's emotions and other feelings come from such actions as your facial expressions, your posture, your level of arousal and behavioral patterns. In this way, feelings are consequences of behavior rather than the other way around. People are angry because they scowl and are happy because they smile. This is the self-perception effect. I hope you understood this. Now, I would like to give you a small activity. Since we have talked so much about self-perception and dissonance in the previous lesson, and now report a self-perception effect that you people have experienced. For example, imagine for a moment that your friend had a terrible day. However, he made previous plans to meet up with some friends for a small social gathering that evening. When he arrives, what does he do? He smiles and elicits warm, polite behavior. For most of us, our original feelings of irritability decrease after smiling and exhibiting happy behavior. Our behavior changes our attitude is what self-perception theory says. Please note, our behavior changes our attitude. This theory is well applied to attitude discrepant behavior. When there is inconsistency or hypocrisy, then between the attitudes, beliefs or behaviors, when people behave in counter-attitudinal manner, they have unpleasant state. That can be resolved only if they give up the existing attitude. So, Bem's self-perception theory states that our expressions of attitudes are nothing but casual verbal statements, as I have reported earlier as well. We observe the conditions under which our behavior occurs and then report our attitude. So, self-perception theory is more applicable in situations where people's attitudes are initially vague, ambiguous or weak. Then coming to the importance and implications of self-perception theory, because self-perception theory suggests that when people's internal awareness of their attitudes or emotions is weak or ambiguous, they can view themselves in much the same way. As an outside observer, it is possible to rely upon external cues or behavioral patterns to infer people's internal states. Even if people are generally self-aware, they cannot always be accurate about why they feel the same way they do. The self-perception effect allows people to gather important cues from their external environment and apply them to understand what attitudes or emotions they are experiencing internally. For example, this is my second plate of dosa. I must have been more hungry than I thought, or I have been fidgeting with my fingers for a long time in the meeting. Something must be troubling me. In both these examples, in both these cases, attitudes or emotions are inferred from our behavior. The self-perception effect also may have an important application when attitudes and behavioral patterns are incongruent or when behavior change is desired. For example, when it comes to the therapeutic situation, therapists working with individuals with alcohol addiction, they have reported the application of principles of self-perception theory in creating change among individuals who begin to consciously observe the amount they are drinking. They might infer from their behavior that they are tense or anxious, and then they do something about it other than drinking. Once they understand that they are tense, because they are into de-addiction and they are consciously aware of it, they do something else rather than going towards the drink. Similarly, behavior change might inform individuals of their internal attitudes about drinking. For example, the behavior of telling others, "I am going to cut down on my drinking," may allow individuals to infer the attitude or internal awareness that their drinking has created problems for themselves or others. This brings us now to the next theory for today's lesson, reactance theory. Research in social influence demonstrates that individuals often move in the direction demanded by a leader, obedience, or modeled by a majority, conformity. In social psychology, you have been doing these concepts. And cognitive dissonance theory suggests that individuals will depreciate the items and activities that are denied to them. However, despite the allure or cognitive consistency and the power of the leader and also the majority, there are many cases in which people resist influence and even move in the opposite direction. It's like what we say, boomerang. You try to change their attitude, it boomerangs and comes back. So, in this context, American psychologist Jack Brem's theory of psychological reactance way back in 1966, and of course later in 1981 also he has written a lot about it. So, his theory of psychological reactance offers an explanation for this obstinate behavior among people and identifies the conditions under which individuals will be motivated to resist compliance. In 1966, Brem introduced his theory of reactance, which stated that people react strongly when freedom is being threatened. Reactance refers to protecting our personal freedom. Reactance is a negative reaction to efforts by others to reduce our freedom by getting us to believe or do what they want. This theory also states that the greater the threat for your freedom, towards your freedom, the stronger the resistance to it. When individuals perceive that the appeals to change their attitude are direct threats to their personal freedom or their image of being an independent person, they are strongly motivated to resist it. Research also indicates that in such situations, we do often change our attitudes and behavior in the opposite direction from what we are being urged or believed to do, we are forced to do. Indeed, when we are feeling reactance, strong arguments in favor of attitude change can increase opposition compared to moderate or weak arguments. This has been suggested by certain researchers. Being persuaded to buy a specific product in the grocery store, being forced to pay some fees, being prohibited from using a mobile phone at home, all these many of us know, and being instructed to perform work for the boss, all are examples of threats that some people perceive to their freedom to act as desired for different age groups in different contexts as well. This is where reactance comes into play. Reactance is an unpleasant motivational arousal that emerges when people experience a threat to or loss of their free behavior. It serves as a motivator to restore one's own freedom. The amount of reactance depends upon the importance of the threatened freedom and the perceived magnitude of that threat. Internal threats are self-imposed, threats arising from choosing specific alternatives and rejecting others. External threats, on the other hand, arise either from impersonal situations, situational factors that create a barrier to an individual's freedom, or from social influence attempts targeting a specific individual, according to Brehm. The unpleasant motivational state of reactance results in behavioral and cognitive efforts to re-establish one's freedom, accompanied by the experience of emotion. People who are threatened usually feel uncomfortable, hostile, aggressive and angry. On the behavioral side, threatened people may exhibit the restricted behavior, direct, restoration, or may observe others performing a related behavioral pattern, which is indirect restoration. They may aggressively force the threatening person to remove the threat, or they may behave in a hostile and aggressive way just to let off the steam, which is considered aggression. On the cognitive side, people may derogate the source of threat, upgrade the restricted freedom, or downgrade the imposed option, which is the change in attractiveness. Now, this brings us to the next aspect, the motivation. Events that threaten or eliminate behavioral freedom create a motivational state, which is reactance, aimed at restoring the freedom or several aspects of freedom in question. The degree of reactance is determined by the importance of the threatened or eliminated freedom or aspects of freedom and the degree of threat. A threat or elimination of freedom results in an increase of attractiveness of the forbidden act, something which they are forced not to do, and the motivation to engage in that behavior. Hence, pressure to engage in a specific act may arouse reactance because this pressure threatens the individual's freedom to adopt other positions or engage in other behavioral patterns. The result will be an increase in the motivation to embrace the forbidden alternative. Let us take an example. Thomas Hammock and Brehm in 1966, they led children to believe that they could choose between a number of candy bars, and when the experimenter threatened the freedom to choose candy bar X, one particular type of candy bar, by stating that candy bar X should not be chosen, then children reacted by choosing that particular item. In another situation, the importance of the freedom to play with a particular toy was varied by pairing it up with similar types of toys of low importance or a different type of toy which is of high importance. The degree of threat to play with a specific toy was manipulated by placing it behind either a high barrier, high threat, or low barrier, which is low threat. The combination of high importance and high threat increased the likelihood of children choosing the toy behind the barrier. This was shown in the research done by Brehm and Weintraub. And Workel and Brehm in 1970 found that a target audience was more likely to adopt a forbidden position which is called boomerang effect, which we have talked about earlier today in this lesson, when the communicator threatened their freedom by explicitly telling them that they could not adopt this position. So, finally, let us talk about the differences between dissonance theory and reactance theory. Research on cognitive dissonance demonstrated that after choosing between two relatively attractive items, individuals enhanced the attractiveness of the chosen item and depreciated the rejected item. However, closer inspection of the behavioral patterns in this free choice paradigm reveals that prior to the decision, individuals often pay closer attention to the item they eventually reject, and immediately after the choice, the rejected alternative increases in its attractiveness and the chosen alternative's attractiveness decreases, which means there is a regret. These effects have been explained by suggesting that choosing an alternative eliminates the freedom of the individual to have the rejected alternative, thereby creating reactance. Here comes the reactance. Looking at another context, research has demonstrated that an item, a commodity or an individual becomes more attractive when it becomes more scarce, when it is not available much, he or she is not available much, is distant or difficult to obtain. From reactance theory point of view, each of these conditions can be viewed as threatening to the individual's freedom to possess them, that item, that situation, that context, and as arousing a state of reactance. Other research has shown that an individual's freedom may be threatened when he or she observes the freedom of a closely related group member being threatened. This is called implied threat, and freedom may be restored, which is called implied restoration, when the individual observes a group member regaining his or her freedom, according to researchers. So, today students, we have talked about two particular major observations and theories related to these observations. One is self-exploration and second is reactance. Both have been explaining the attitude change from their respective points of view, and none of these points of view, in fact, we can say is foolproof. Not every point of view is 100% acceptable or accepted by the larger fraternity in psychology, nor is everything rejected. Each theory is valued for its particular advantages and yes, criticized for its particular disadvantages. So, we will meet next class again with yet another lesson related to attitude change. Good day.